every generation gets a label. Boomers got the greatest generation's kids. Millennials got entitled. Gen Z got chronically online. Gen X got skipped. Researchers call them the middle child of American demographics. Squeezed between two of the loudest generations in modern history, Gen X learned early to operate without applause, without a safety net, and without anyone asking how their day went. But here's what nobody factored into the equation. That silence, that long stretch of unsupervised hours between the final school bell and whenever headlights pulled into the driveway, it built something. A psychological toolkit so deeply embedded that even the people carrying it don't always recognize what's running in the background. These are 8 hidden strengths that Gen X carries. And almost every one of them was forged before they turned 13. Number 1, threat assessment without panic. You know the person at work who doesn't flinch when the system goes down. The one who's already mapping the fix while everyone else is still staring at the error screen. People mistake that composure for indifference. That's a misread. Their nervous system was trained in real time. When you grow up letting yourself into an empty house at age 8, walking through dark hallways in suburban neighborhoods where nobody is home, you build a rapid assessment protocol without realizing it. Is the front door locked the way I left it? Are the lights where they should be? Is there a sound coming from upstairs that wasn't there yesterday? You learn to scan a room before you know what the phrase situational awareness means. Psychologists call this low arousal competence, the ability to evaluate a threat and respond without your cortisol flooding the system. Emergency responders and military operators spend years training for this. Gen X built it by accident, walking through unlocked front doors after school in 1984. It shows up everywhere now. Turbulence at 30,000 feet, a conference room where the client just pulled the deal. A hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, the Gen X person has already mapped 2 contingencies before the silence finishes settling. And the people around them never quite understand how they stay so level, they just know they're glad that person is there. And that scanning instinct only worked because they had something else backing it up. Number 2, analog problem solving. Before Google, before GPS, before you could ask a chatbot how to unclog a drain, there was figuring it out yourself. Gen X is the last generation that had to physically hunt down information. You needed a book, you drove to the public library and pulled drawers out of the card catalog. You needed directions, you unfolded a paper map across the hood of your car and traced the route with your finger. You needed to fix something, you opened it up, looked inside, and either figured it out or called a neighbor who'd been fixing things since the Johnson administration. This built a specific cognitive architecture. When your first instinct is to deconstruct and investigate rather than to search and scroll, you wire your brain for what cognitive scientists call effortful retrieval. Research shows this produces stronger and more flexible knowledge than passive searching. When you had to work for the information, your brain encoded it differently. It stuck. It connected to things you already knew. It became part of how you think, not just something you looked up and forgot by Thursday. And the scarcity went beyond information. 3 television channels, 1 landline phone on the kitchen wall, a summer budget of $0. When you have almost nothing, you invent. You repurpose things the manufacturer never intended. Gen X carried that into their careers, building functional solutions from free tools while the rest of the team waits for the enterprise license to clear. In a world increasingly dependent on systems that go offline without warning, that analog instinct sitting in the back of their minds is a backup generator the rest of the world forgot to maintain. But knowing how to fix things is only half the equation. You also have to know when someone's lying to you about what's broken. Number 3, calibrated skepticism. Gen X watched Watergate fallout play out on their parents' television sets. They saw the Challenger space shuttle explode on a screen wheeled into their elementary school classroom. They witnessed Wall Street collapse, savings and loan scandals drain retirement accounts across the country, politicians resign, corporations fold, and churches cover up crimes that wouldn't surface for decades. Every institution their parents believed in either lied, failed, or quietly buckled under the weight of its own promises. So they stopped taking the broadcast at face value? Not because they wanted to be difficult. Because their pattern recognition was calibrated early by watching real institutional betrayal unfold in real time on a 19-inch screen in the living room. Call it cynicism if you want. That filter runs quietly through every pitch meeting, every news cycle, every too good to be true opportunity that slides across their desk. They require receipts before they buy in. And when someone in a boardroom says, "Trust the process," the Gen X person across the table is already running a background check on the process itself. In a landscape drowning in misinformation and manufactured urgency, where algorithms are built to exploit emotional reactivity, that quiet filter behind the eyes of every Gen X professional is an immune system. And it's functioning exactly as designed. But skepticism alone doesn't keep you moving. You also need a reason to keep going when nobody's watching. Number 4, self-directed motivation. Nobody was standing over a Gen X kid in an empty kitchen saying great job for finishing their homework. No reward chart on the refrigerator, no participation trophy at the end of the season. Just a key around your neck, a note on the counter that said leftovers in the fridge, and a stack of math worksheets that weren't going to grade themselves. You did the thing because the thing needed to be done. That was the entire feedback loop. Psychologists describe this as intrinsic motivation, the ability to sustain effort without external validation, and it's becoming genuinely scarce. Workplace engagement studies keep circling the same conclusion. Even the employees who burn out fastest are the ones whose fuel depends entirely on recognition from someone standing over their shoulder in the office. That dependency was never wired into their system. The fuel source was always internal. Not because they chose some enlightened path, because there was no other option available at 3:45 on a Wednesday afternoon, with the kitchen clock ticking and nobody pulling into the driveway. Decades later, that self-sustaining engine is the reason they don't spiral when the feedback disappears. They just keep building, with or without an audience. Now, there's a reason self-motivated people don't fall apart in a crisis, and it connects to the next one. Number 5, emotional self-regulation under pressure. This one gets misread constantly. People look at Gen X composure during a crisis, i.e. that flat expression during a boardroom meltdown or a family emergency, and they label it detachment. They call it not caring. That reading is wrong. What's actually running is a containment protocol. When your childhood taught you that expressing distress wouldn't bring help any faster, that crying on the couch with the television on changed nothing about the situation, you learn to manage the signal internally. You feel the full weight of the moment. You just don't let it steer. Here's the distinction that matters. Suppression is pretending the feeling doesn't exist. That's a breakdown on a timer. Regulation is acknowledging the feeling, placing it in the passenger seat, and keeping both hands on the wheel while you drive through the situation. Watch a Gen X parent at a Little League game when their kid strikes out. Watch a Gen X manager deliver layoff news to a team they built. Watch them sit in the waiting room of a hospital at 3 in the morning. The face stays level, the breathing stays even, and the people around them feel steadier because of it, even when they can't explain why. In high-stakes environments, from emergency rooms to corporate restructuring meetings to raising teenagers who just discovered the unfiltered internet, that regulation is the distance between reacting and responding. One escalates, the other resolves. Gen X didn't learn this from a wellness app downloaded at 35. They learned it because the alternative was falling apart with nobody walking down the hallway to help. If you're recognizing yourself in any of this, hit subscribe. There's more of this kind of breakdown every week. And that ability to sit in discomfort without breaking leads directly to the next one. Number 6, solitude competence. Nobody talks about this one. Probably because the people who have it don't feel the need to bring it up. In a culture that treats being alone like a condition requiring intervention, Gen X treats solitude like a resource. They don't need constant input from a group chat. They don't need the room full of voices to feel whole. They learned to be their own company decades before self-care became a trending hashtag on social media platforms. And before anyone confuses this with isolation wearing a better label, consider what the research actually shows. Studies on solitude competence from behavioral psychology journals report that people who are genuinely comfortable being alone produce higher creative output. I'll make sharper decisions and experience lower anxiety when they do enter social situations. They aren't retreating from connection. They just don't need it administered intravenously. Put a Gen X professional in a quiet office for 4 uninterrupted hours and watch what comes out. They don't need the buzz of an open floor plan to stay engaged. They were productive in silence long before anyone started calling it deep work. That comfort with silence, with stillness, with their own uninterrupted thoughts in a quiet room with one lamp on and no notifications pinging. In a world that refuses to stop screaming for attention from every screen and speaker and notification badge, it might be the most quietly valuable operating system any generation is running right now. But being comfortable alone is one thing. On navigating other people with zero guidance, that took a different kind of training. Number 7. Unscripted social navigation. When a Gen X kid had a conflict with another kid on the playground, there was no parent standing by to mediate, no teacher running a restorative justice circle, no app to report the incident through. You had to figure it out yourself, face to face, in real time, with real consequences if you got it wrong. And if you handled it badly, the feedback was immediate. Somebody stopped talking to you, somebody picked someone else for their team. The social cost was instant and unfiltered. That built a specific kind of social intelligence that's hard to replicate in structured environments. You learned to read a room before you opened your mouth, which battles to fight and which ones to walk away from. And that some people respond to directness and others respond to patience. And you figured out which was which by getting it wrong first and adjusting. Developmental psychologists call this autonomous social problem solving. And the research shows it produces adults with stronger conflict resolution skills, higher emotional intelligence in ambiguous situations, and a faster ability to read nonverbal cues in meetings, negotiations, and relationships. There was no workshop on difficult conversations. They had 10,000 of them before high school, on basketball courts and in parking lots, and across backyard fences, with zero adult supervision and full accountability for the outcome. By the time they reached an office with a human resources department, they'd already been running their own for 20 years. But there's one final strength on this list, and it might be the one that ages the best. Number 8. Delayed gratification tolerance. This is the one that separates Gen X from almost every generation that came after them. They waited 6 to 8 weeks for a mail order package. They waited months for a movie to leave theaters and show up at the video rental store down the street. They waited all week for their favorite television show to air one new episode on one specific night, and if they missed it, they missed it. On demand didn't exist. Streaming queues didn't exist. And no algorithm was going to serve it up again tomorrow. The result was patience circuitry that on-demand culture simply does not construct. And the research on delayed gratification was stretching all the way back to the Stanford marshmallow experiments and the longitudinal studies that followed, shows that tolerance for waiting correlates with stronger long-term financial outcomes, higher career achievement, and lower rates of impulsive decision-making across a lifetime. In practice, that looks like a generation that doesn't abandon a strategy after 2 weeks, because the dashboard hasn't moved yet. They understand, on a neurological level, trained by decades of waiting for things to arrive, that some results need time to develop. And the ability to sit with that discomfort without switching course is itself a competitive advantage that gets more valuable the older they get. They're the investors who hold a position through turbulence because they did the research and trust the thesis. You're the parents who plant values in their kids, knowing the harvest is 15 years away and not losing sleep over the wait. 8 strengths. Not one of them came from a curriculum or a certificate program. Every single one was built in the field, unstructured, unmonitored, and without anyone standing by to grade the results. Nobody assigned a mentor, and no algorithm optimized the process. Just time, pressure, and an empty house with the lights off. The generation that got edited out of the cultural conversation might be the one that's been quietly holding it together the entire time.